Good morning and good afternoon from England. Can I first of all thank you both for agreeing to do this interview and to agree to do the webinars. Patos has been involved in SWI for some time now. Thank you for helping us to continue to extend this teaching approach. Is it possible for both Cara and Jennifer, if you could explain your background before we start? Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'll go first. Hi, everybody. I'm Kara Lee. And coming out of undergraduate, I actually had an undergraduate degree in psychology, but can't really do much with that unless you pursue further education. So I went into school psychology, actually. So here in the United States, that's somebody who will typically works in the K through 12 school system, identifying students who might qualify under our different disability categories. And of course, I came across a lot of students who couldn't read. That was the bulk of the students that I worked with, of course, whether or not something else was also going on as well. So I noticed that, of course, very quickly, and then thought, well, why is this? And why are they not really getting much better 3 years later when I work with them again, right? So, and I evaluate them again. So I decided that I wanted to dive more deeply into looking at really what was the science behind learning how to read and what instructional approaches were happening, right? And not being in the classroom and not having that background, I decided to actually go back and get my teaching degree. So I was able to then go back to school and uh, kind of found out that honestly, teachers don't learn. Teachers who are in training to become teachers don't learn everything that they need to know necessarily about how kids learn how to read. And so that was a real eye opener as well. But that set me on my journey to actually finding training that would allow me to do that. And so I have a background in Orton Gillingham. And training was the first training that kind of I received in that way. And then through that training, actually, I found structured word inquiry several years later and found that it was a really great, filled in a lot of holes and a lot of gaps that I had noticed in my Orton Gillingham kind of training. And so I ended up sort of meshing both of those and along the way, married a guy who's in the military. So we started moving around the world all over the place and started actually my own teacher training business. And so I do a mix of teacher training and also working with students privately as well. But the bulk of what I do is actually training teachers. So I'm trying to bring the things I've learned along the way to them. So that's what I do currently. And then wrote a book with my very good friend Jennifer, who I found, who I found along the way in our SWI journeys.
Thank you very much. Do you mind if I just sort of contextualize one or two things, if that's okay with you?
Sure.
Um, In England, the equivalent to a child psychologist would be an educational psychologist. There are some differences, but on the whole, that's the nearest equivalent professional. And as a child
Okay.
psychologist, your reports are accepted. I can't remember the organisation now, sorry. Um, by the society, by the professional body for psychology in the UK. Um, Alton Gillingham is, I suppose, the nearest equivalent would be in England would be the Alpha to Omega book by Bevy Hornsby, who was actually trained by the lady who worked in the Quaker school, who died at 100. Um, she met her and she was trained in Alton Gillingham and she adapted it with speech language therapy. And the other one would be the Hickey scheme, which was also came from the Alton Gillingham stable. So there are two books in the UK. That would be the nearest equivalent to Alton Gillingham. So the only reason I knew that about Debbie Hornby was my teacher, so I happened to know that she went to the States and learned from a lady who gave evidence, to, I think, to a Congress at the age of 100.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so she was quite incredible. So thank you. Jennifer, is it possible to explain your background?
Certainly. So I started out as a teacher and I knew right away I wanted to be a reading teacher. So I went and got a reading specialist credential and actually worked in public schools for nearly 20 years. We have a federal program here called Title I, which allocates money for students who need extra help. And so that's the kind of situation I was working in for most of that time. And during that time, like Kara said, both my teaching credential and my reading specialist credential did not prepare me enough to teach reading. And that's what I was doing all day long, every day. So I was constantly seeking. I got another certificate, master's level certificate in dyslexia. I trained in Norton Gillingham also, and just never found what I felt was enough for the toughest kids, but all of the kids really. And then I walked through into the SWI world, and that's a one-way door. And once you learn the understanding that structured word inquiry offers, you just feel so empowered to help everyone. And I have stopped looking. This was it. And now I'm in private practice, having moved from my state of California to the state of Oregon, also a licensed teacher here, but seeing kids privately.
Thank you very much. And can I just demonstrate this is the book you published? So it's part of the interview today with that. So could I first ask you, what is SWI?
So SWI is really, I think, best thought of as a framework for teaching the English writing system. The word structured kind of refers to the sense that it is an approach that is not random or incidental. It is premeditated, and we're using an explicit approach still to teaching. And there is, like I said, there is a framework around it. It's not just, oh, what do I want to teach today kind of thing. I mean, it sort of is, but you always have a purpose, right? You always have something in mind that you're wanting to reveal about the system. And then this word inquiry, it is really to think about it in the sense of teachers and students are really investigating the writing system using a scientific approach, which fosters, I think, a much more comprehensive and deep understanding on the part of the students and the teachers. Again, and just slowly kind of revealing what we notice using evidence from the writing system itself, right? And what are we noticing and what does that say about the system and how can we then make a broader, even if we're studying one word, what's that tell us about the whole system? So I think that's a kind of a nice way to think about structured word inquiry.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Jennifer? That's perfect. Thank you very much. How does it differ from other approaches to teaching dyslexic students and people?
So what Jen and I have both found, I think, is that, and we've kind of talked about this sort of a little bit alluded to when we were talking about our backgrounds, a lot of approaches, and certainly the ones that we kind of came from, sort of an Orton Gillingham way of thinking about things, rely very heavily, sometimes exclusively almost, on a pronunciation as being the foundation for teaching students how to read and spell. And it really doesn't take long to find the cracks in that foundation. For example, when students are taught that AY spells A, then they come across the word SAYS, right? Says, and with the pronunciation where AY is not saying A.
Mm.
And then many approaches would then call that an exception or a rule breaker or, all these maybe different words. And then they would advocate maybe for just a different approach for learning that kind of a word, such as maybe memorizing it, for example. But we also know from the science of reading that that's just not how that's not the way that any of us learn how to read any word.
And memorizing, really increases the cognitive load.
Mm.
And when we're talking about our dyslexic learners, especially, we can't ask them to increase what they have to be thinking about when they're trying to hold all these things in their head. So SWI really gives a framework for not asking kids to memorize, for not calling things exceptions, and for having a way to explain things. And also, I think that it's not, SWI is, we talk about it as being really great for dyslexic students, and it is, but it's really great for everyone. Everyone should understand the system as it exists in the world. So that's what it's about.
Thank you very much. Why did you write this book then? Why did you write the book if it's been out there for such a
Yeah.
period of time?
Well, like we said, we tried every approach out there, and then we found SWI, and found each other, and we were actually continuing to study together weekly. And what we realized was that we loved everything we were learning. We were meeting people who had deep understandings, and there were a few resources out there, but we just realized that the question that we heard over and over was, how do we get started?
Yeah.
How do we implement it? We were sold because we love understanding the system in a way we never had. We want to give that understanding to our students, but it's a little bit overwhelming because this isn't a program you can buy off the shelf.
Mm.
You know, there's nobody sitting in a company making a whole ton of money selling this as a prepackaged program, because this is just understanding the system. And so we really wanted to strip it down to the most essential tools and give teachers and tutors and parents a way to start.
Mm.
That's why we wrote it.
Thank you. That's and it does do that, doesn't it? It's quite clear. I like the way you've linked everything into other resources as well. I think that's quite useful because sometimes, I don't know, it might just be me, but sometimes when I'm walking into a class, I can't always, when I'm planning a class, I can't, I'm often sitting there thinking, oh, this resource would be useful after I've actually started teaching, if that makes sense. So I've got to go back to it another time. So I quite like how you're sort of linked to all like Sue's materials and uh, everyone else's materials in the books, really.
Yeah.
Mm. What will you be covering in the paid webinar?
Yeah. So in the paid or the
Yeah,
free? I'm sorry.
for the paid one to begin with. Yeah.
Okay. So in the paid one, we will go, we understand that the situation for, quite frankly, many teachers is that they've been handed a curriculum to use, right? Like here's what we've adopted is in our school, or kind of like Jen was saying, kind of like off the shelf, here's what we're using. Which more and more is usually based in phonics, sort of that approach we talked about earlier about how kind of a pronunciation-based approach and, phoneme grapheme correspondence, like as the main way to teach reading and spelling. But as we said before, we know that there are some holes in that way of doing things, and it doesn't really give the best way of it doesn't really lead you to an understanding of how the system works, which is actually based around meaning, right, and morphology. So the paid one, what we'd like to do is be able to help teachers see, or anyone who's working with the student, how do I take that curriculum I've been given and integrate an SWI approach with what, because we know that there's no more time in a day. No one's given more time in their day, right? And we often keep, especially in the in the United States, I think a lot of teachers feel like they just keep being asked to do more and more and more, and we pile on and we try to implement more and more without sort of de-implementing things that aren't working, and things like that. So we understand the situation is with different laws and different, no matter your curriculum that you've been given, when you can bring an understanding of the writing system to that, you will start to see how you can start bringing in this idea of, that the organizing structure is actually morphology and meaning. And so that's what we wanted to do with the paid, was to show folks kind of we've been talking about it like a bridge class of, here I've got this over here that I have to teach, and here's what I want my students to also understand that they're not getting over here, and how do I do that?
Excellent. Yeah. Do you want to add anything, Jennifer?
Well, maybe just that also there are a lot of misconceptions out there about SWI, that we don't talk about grapheme phoneme correspondences, or that they aren't central and important. And, that isn't the case, actually. So we'd like to be able to show teachers how they can still be faithful to the phonics that they're supposed to be teaching, but in the context of the larger writing system in a way that, will make sense to kids.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that'd be really useful because you said, yeah, it's I know people have done the course and have think sometimes they don't always have the time to fully implement it, which they regret really. What will be then the difference between this paid one and the free webinar that you're going to be offering?
I think in the free one, we want to just provide an overview of the book, how it's structured, and probably dive into the first lesson, really take teachers through it so that they can see how the book works, an overview of kind of what the essential tools are. As you talked about the resources, we want to point them to the resources because there are a lot of resources out there, but sometimes, you know, you don't just stumble over them. So we've got them all in one document gathered together for teachers. So we'd like to show that. I think, yeah, that's about it. Is that right, Kara?
Yep, absolutely. We'll be providing a copy of that first lesson actually to everybody in that free, so they can, you know, have that, and again, show a demonstration of what that actually looks like. And we think it's, the word implementation is in the title of our book for that exact reason, because it just seemed like that's what they need to see, and what does it look like? Like, yeah, I'm in, but how do I do it? How do I start? What do I start with? So that's kind of what the free one, we want to give them a taste of.
Can I also ask you, how is it possible for people to actually purchase this book?
Amazon.
Amazon, is it?
Yep.
You go onto Amazon, they can get this, because there's a lot of people who've done SWI courses, obviously, and constantly looking for resources. So if this is via Amazon, you can buy the book via Amazon. Brilliant. Thank you very much, both of you. It was excellent.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.